Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming to my talk. My name is Kiran, and today I'll be telling you about the process that I went through to create my card game, Deeper Questions, which is a storytelling card game that helps you connect deeper with those you love. But to start off, I'd love to get a general sense of the folks in the room. Of sort of like whereabouts you are in the process of creating a game, whether you're working in games or you've got an idea for a game or you're working on something or you've released games out there. Our folks have ideas for games but haven't started one, just by a show of hands. Okay, cool, nice. And maybe you've got an idea for a game and you're in the thick of designing it and workshopping it. Who's that? Okay, cool. And then maybe you've released a few games and they're out there in the world and you're trying to spread the word. Who's that? Okay, cool. I mean, you're probably all of the above as well. I get that. Okay, cool. Thanks for that. So hopefully you get something away from my story and process of the game. Whether it's adding or subtracting something from your design process, or if you've done this all before, maybe reflecting on your own. Or if this is new to you and you want to create a tabletop card game, then hopefully this in itself is like one way to do it. Here we go. By the way, had I known there was going to be a gigantic projector screen like this, I might not have put in massive photos of my face out there. Anyways. So my name is Kiran. I was born in Whangarei, up north. And I was brought up in Holland. And my parents and ancestry is all Indian, and I've been living in Auckland for the last 15 years. So effectively, I'm just like eternally confused about where I'm from. And in the last 10 years, I've been a freelance documentary filmmaker, making films about all kinds of things, really the human story behind social issues, whether it's climate change or disability issues or whatever it might be. And one of the things that I've learned about documentary filmmaking is that 50% of it is really the technical ability, the lights, the camera, the editing, all that. But then the other 50% is the environment that you create with the person that you're interviewing, making them feel safe and comfortable to be able to share their story with you. And I remember this particular filmmaking session where I had interviewed someone. They were super interesting. I remember being really giddy and excited about all the things I had learned about their life. And I was going to see my parents that night. And I went home and I was talking to my parents about all the things that I had learned about this person's life. But as I was sharing it, I was coming to realize that I know all the details of this person's life story, but I didn't necessarily know those exact details of my parents' story. And as I was sharing it, I was kind of like, this almost feels like odd that I'm retelling the story of someone else, but not necessarily knowing that of my parents. And I then in that moment decided to ask my mom this question that is now in the pack. What's one of your favorite years of your life? And she told me about a story when she was 20 and she was dating, and there were two guys that she was interested in, one who got really good grades and one who had a motorbike. And it was just stuff that we never talked about. It was like, I was blown away. I was like, this is so interesting and exciting. And it felt, I guess in that moment I felt like I had a bit of a eureka moment, that these questions aren't just great for documentary films, but also to get to know my parents and the people closest to you. And at that point, I suppose I sort of got to work. I remember 6 months after that moment, I was traveling to Thailand and I was visiting a friend, and that friend, we always talk about projects and business ideas. And I remember having this sort of insight, this moment of, questions are really powerful, and I wonder if I could turn that into something. And I think the thing where this whole journey started was like with starting the name. And I remember being on the plane ride back from Thailand back to New Zealand, and I had started with Google keywords because I was interested in seeing what people search for, and figure out like if a name could pop through there. And so I was typing things like, you know, conversation card game or questions, deep and meaningful questions, things like that. And I had come across this fact that it was like tens of thousands of people a month search for the keyword deeper questions to ask my boyfriend. And I was like, wow, that's pretty interesting. Like, that's very specific. And I couldn't believe that there wasn't a product out there called Deeper Questions. And I remember being on the plane realizing this. And I remember looking around feeling like, I think I've struck gold here. Like, there's a lot of people looking for deeper questions, but there isn't something out there called that. So Google Keywords was a really nice place for me to start, and can be something when you're choosing a name, a different way to find one. For me, choosing a name really gave it life. At the beginning of this process, having a name for this project meant that I could start talking to people about it. You know, if I'm talking about a concept, maybe it's like a slower and sluggish kind of way in which to like get them to be interested. But I'm working on this project. It's a game called Deeper Questions, and something about that felt like it like breathed life into the game itself, but into myself as well to give confidence to share about the game as well. I have a real thing for like names that say exactly what it is. If you've been to the US, you might know of the rideshare app Lyft. And I remember, I think it was in California, and I'd gone out with a friend, and my phone had died, and he had paid for a Lyft ride and for me to get back to my Airbnb, I suppose. And just as I was getting into the car, I turned back and I said, "Oh, by the way, thanks for the lift." And I was like, "How good is that?" Like, and I was like, "Man, how good are names that just say exactly what they are?" And I feel like those sorts of things are just like helpful tools to think about when you're choosing a name, or like, what are people going to say? You know, hey, should we play a bit of Deeper Questions? Or should we try this thing out? Or maybe we should bring along Deeper Questions, like using these kind of scenarios where in which real people are going to be saying it and using it, and making sure your name actually fits with the things that people say and search for. So that was step one. Step two was learning about the world that I was entering into. I've been a filmmaker for the last 10 years. A year ago, I wouldn't have called myself even a game developer. This all launched about a year ago. So I really needed to just figure out the world that I was entering into. And the first thing I did was bought all the games that I could find in the same genre. And I think I bought about 12 conversation card games. And that was already so interesting. Being able to like just figure out what I liked or didn't like about each of the ones, their packaging, the cards themselves, the feel and the vibe of each one as well. And also the things that I didn't like and the things that I wanted to do differently. I remember I pulled out a card out of one of the games, and the first card was a question that asked, "Do you think your parents did a good job of raising you?" And I remember being like, God, what an intense-ass question. Like, that's not the type of question that I would ask a stranger, let alone a colleague or a friend at a party. And remembering thinking, like, I definitely want to create cards that maybe are more positive in nature and maybe more, chill. After that, I remember posting on my Instagram asking if anyone had these sorts of card games and what their experience of it was like. And I got similar responses back. People talking about how they had these different card games, but found that the questions can be sometimes too intense, or maybe just like kind of dig in or pry, or almost like try and elicit this kind of, negative story, or lends itself to things like trauma dumping or sharing too much, perhaps. And so that was really, really insightful and helpful to do. after that was, yeah, coffees with friends and friends of friends. I think the facilitators that I'd met were all friends of friends, and just asking people like who knew anyone that used these sorts of card games for whatever they do in their world. And that was really handy because those people could just directly tell me what they liked and didn't like about the things that they were using already. The psychologist that I had met up with, the first one that I met up with, introduced me to a bunch of concepts that became the backbone of the philosophy behind the card game itself. She talked to me about appreciative inquiry, questions that elicit positive responses within people, some positive psychology that is a part of the game itself, and really some like strengths-based questioning, like the type of questions that make people reflect on positive things in their life as well. I had talked to a game developer, Rosie, who's now a close friend of mine, and she introduced me to the world of creating a physical product. And she was telling me that hers is a wonderful board game called Kopapa that's got a number of pieces and things that she had to make. And I remember telling me like, oh my God, it's a box and cards. Like, this is a really great start. There's not a lot of components, and that's going to be really, really helpful. And even just learning about things like card weights and the types of finishes and all these sorts of things were extremely helpful to hear right at the beginning. So yeah, having heaps of coffees, learning about the world was crucial. Next was figuring out how to make it. And as I said, didn't know anything about this world, so I would do what anyone would do, is jump onto Google and say, card box manufacturer. I think over the 6 months that I was trying to figure out how to make a prototype, I had talked to about 7 or 8 different like cardboard box manufacturers. I'd started with like the ultimate box that I wanted to create. I wanted to create like sort of the iPhone box experience where it was almost like the box itself is something that you wanted to keep, you know, that this would be somewhat of a like ceremonial thing to open and play this game. I wanted the box to be something really beautiful. But then the 7 or 8 different box manufacturers basically after that 6 months told me that they just didn't make it in New Zealand because it just cost too much, and that making it overseas makes it really hard for them to justify to make these sorts of boxes. So after sort of 6 months of prototyping with all kinds of things, like a matchbox type of thing where it slides out. This one's more a jewelry box with like a magnet at the front. I had tried just like popping off the top, and that was something, but sometimes they were too loose and you'd do it vertically and then it would just fall over. And there was so many things that I didn't expect to kind of encounter when just making what I thought was just a simple box with a few components. So in that case, there was a lot of constant compromising. My initial prototype, once I had found this manufacturer who made this box, was half the size. And I was really happy with that. And I was like, oh, great. It can fit in your pocket. It can fit in your backpack. You might take it to a dinner or whatever it might be. But then I needed a guide. I really wanted to have like a quick guide of how to play, things to consider when you're playing. And they said that they just couldn't do it. It wouldn't fit in the box that we had chosen, which was half the size. So when we decided to go and double the size, I remember seeing it for the first time thinking, this is gigantic and no one is going to take this anywhere. And I was really scared about it, but now I can't imagine it. And now I still have the small prototype. I kind of wish I brought it. And it just looks so tiny and you can barely read anything on the box. So sometimes these, what seem like compromises end up being kind of happy accidents. How I ended up actually finding the manufacturer was somewhat asking a competitor. I asked someone, I say competitor because I don't really see it that way, but ultimately someone who in New Zealand has also created a conversation card game. And she was wonderful. I said, look, I've been working on this for the last year and I've been struggling to make it in New Zealand. And she too had a very similar experience and said, look, getting it done overseas is just what you have to do. So that kind of felt like it gave me permission to do that whilst I had to kind of work through my own thing to, do that confidently, I suppose. Yeah. After that, it was about building the brand. So at this point, I had some level of like a prototype box, but I didn't have any design really. So I started on the other place that a lot of people might start, which is Canva, and just piece different things together. I didn't think that what I would create on Canva would be the final product. So I had created some mock-ups and then sent it to a designer who I thought would be able to then turn it into vectors and whatever else it might need to be to have it properly printed. But turned out after 3 different iterations, we ended up coming back to my original design that I had created on Canva, albeit like the font is something I had bought and all these sorts of things. But it was, interesting. The designer is very professional and was really incredible, but sometimes like communicating exactly what you want can be quite a difficult thing. And I, in that process, learned to trust my gut and perhaps just, whether it was me being stubborn or me just feeling like communicating what I wanted didn't come across, but ultimately super stoked with how it looks. And sometimes, even though you might not be a designer, you might be the perfect designer for your game. The other thing that really helped when I was building the brand was pitching the story. So I found this workshop by an organization called the King's Trust, where they do these kind of entrepreneurship programs. And it was a 2-day program where you kind of came in with an idea and they helped you workshop different elements of it. And on one of the days we had to like pitch our idea. And I was really kind of afraid of this because I had somewhat of a loose idea. I knew I wanted it to be more positive. I knew I wanted it to be like a beautiful game in itself. But I didn't feel like I had the story that would bring people in. And as a part of this process, I remember thinking that like a story is the thing that's going to help people relate and understand. And what is the like universal truth or universal experience that everyone feels that might help people understand what I'm trying to create. And I had come to the words of like connect deeper with those you love. And when I think about those words, I think about the fact that there probably isn't many human beings in the world that don't want to connect deeper with those they love. And when I'd share that, I'd notice people like their ears would perk up and be like, yeah, that's, that sounds about right. That feels like something that I'd want to do. And workshopping and being in an environment where you're immersing yourself with other people and their ideas was extremely helpful for coming up with the brand story. Then came to actually creating the questions. I had spent the first year ultimately just having coffees, trying to create prototypes, and doing these workshops and things. And then finally came creating the questions. The concept itself, of course, is quite simple. It's 45 questions on cards in a box. But this process was actually more nuanced than you might assume. We started with creating a 7-point rubric for each question. And some of those things are, we wanted people to have a choice of how deep they wanted to go when they were responding to a question. So it wasn't things like, tell me about the most recent time that you had to be courageous. It was, tell me a time that you had to be courageous. And that simple little technique just meant that people, when they're answering that question, probably think of a few responses that they could share. And then, depending on who they're talking to, choose one that feels more appropriate. As I said before, we wanted it to be positive gearing. So in that question, tell me about a time that you had to be courageous. In order for you to have labeled that experience as courageous, you will have had to have been proud of how you were in that moment, right? And so in that way, it's helping you reflect on how you were or a positive moment, even if it comes from a hard time. There's things like we wanted each question to not have an automatic answer. It had to be a question that had some level of novelty. We wanted people to have to genuinely sit, pause, reflect on the answer itself, which hopefully would bring a more genuine and thoughtful answer. And these sorts of things were Yeah, essential when creating something like this, because otherwise we had a whole list of questions, but no real way to figure out which ones were better or worse, or which ones felt like what we really were wanting to do or not. So having that 7-point rubric was really key. It was also really hard to, like, I think the term in filmmaking is kill your darlings, where you have to kind of like get rid of the different things that you don't need in your film. I had a list of 120 questions, and I found it really hard to whittle them down. So phoning a friend, my friend Zandi up there, which again, had I had known this was going to be such a large projector, I probably would have chosen a more favorable photo of him. But anyways, he came on board and just joined me for a number of Zoom calls to just answer each question, to sit and feel how they land within him, test the questions with friends, and see how we go. And testing is essential and necessary. I started just posting on my Instagram like little design things like, oh, maybe we should have a green background and a border. Which one do you think? And I had initially thought we were just going to have the white cards with a green border, but seems like my friends believed otherwise. 83% wanted green cards. And I'm glad that we did that, because I now agree too. Cool. Looks like I've got 5 minutes. I'm going to race through this one. So building the movement felt really important. I started the social media for the card game really, really early. I knew I was going to do a Kickstarter last year in October, and I started the Instagram in June. I knew that I needed people to test the game, so I needed to build some interest beforehand. I knew that I'm going to need a bunch of people to help pledge and, I suppose, donate to the Kickstarter. So I wanted to start building the hype a bit earlier on. I started with just a video of myself saying, hey, I've got a card game. This is what I'm wanting to do. And people were interested and intrigued. And so I followed it up with what I called a taster tour, where a few friends opened up their house to have me come by and have the game on A4 sheets of paper and have my friends kind of play it. Ended up running 7 events with anywhere between 6 to 20 people at each of those events to play and test and try these questions, each with a form that starred them out of 5 and asking what they liked about it and what they didn't like about it. And what was great about doing 7 events was that in the first one, you'd obviously get feedback on all of them, and some of them had 2 out of 5 stars, and it'd be like, oh man, this is obviously something I might need to look at, especially when a few people were saying that. So we'd workshop that a little bit, change it into the next one, and then see what happens again. And those 7 events all happened within a 2-month period, so it was quite quick, but it was like, it felt really satisfying to get to the end of those 7 events and have all the questions have 4 or 5 out of 5, which felt really great. After that point, I also put a digital version online to basically just get as many people involved in the process as possible. I wanted as many people as possible to feel like they were designing and being a part of this process as well, for a number of reasons. Of course, the more feedback, the better, but also to get a sense of what it's like to play these questions in all the varying different circumstances that people might be playing it. So I started then getting just anecdotal feedback of people playing it with their parents or their friends, and which times it worked and which times it didn't. Okay, I think a couple more. Then it was important to have a party. There was about 250 people that were a part of that process, about 80 people who came to the events, but then about 120 people who played the digital version and gave me feedback. I had all their emails and sent them an invite to a place just off K Road to help me launch the Kickstarter, which is kind of an awkward thing, because usually like a launch party, you have the final product, but it worked really, really well. And Kickstarter does a great job of being able to hit the publish button, and there's a countdown, and there's the confetti thing, so you can kind of do it publicly. I also created some incentives, which really worked in my favor. I basically asked a few friends to donate some of their goods or products to create a raffle, and basically said to the people who were there, if you back the project today, then you'll get a ticket to this raffle. And it meant that in the first 6 minutes, we got to I think it was 6,500 of my $10,000 goal, which was pretty incredible. And yeah, totally blew my mind, hence my face over there. Cool. Couple more minutes. Keeping momentum up. During the Kickstarter, I just asked friends and friends of friends to see if I could just be a part of whatever they were doing to show people the game. I had a friend who was a lecturer at in the design school at Auckland, so I came and shared the story of Deeper Questions to them. I had a friend who does yoga in the park, and I said, maybe we could do a little Deeper Questions session with you, and he was up for that, so that was great. I even tried on K Road in Auckland, I set up a little table and put like 2 plates and called it Conversation by Candlelight, where the meal was the conversation, and had the cards on the plates, and I pretended to be a waiter, which was such a great idea, but then I forgot that I'd just be like standing there for 3 hours waiting for people to sit there, which was kind of awkward, but made for great photos and a cool little activation. I emailed a bunch of media outlets, and the Kickstarter was really great for that. Having a Kickstarter is actually really good, like in terms of getting media, because the story is really clear that you have 30 days to raise this amount of money, and I think something about that makes it easy to tell a story about. So RNZ picked it up and did a little radio interview, which was awesome. That alone got me 1,500 in the Kickstarter, so that was amazing and very worthwhile. Last 2 slides. And now it's really about spreading the word. The cool thing about this game, I guess, unlike perhaps like a mobile game where you're constantly updating it with a physical product, once you've created the game and you're happy with it, you can spend now the most of your time just trying to spread the word. And the cool thing about this particular game is that it's got a lot of different applications. So nowadays I just spend my time emailing Airbnbs and gift stores and retail shops and cafes. And one of the cool things about the card game and it working in cafes is that friends will go to cafes and they'll play it, and it'll become a part of people's Sunday ritual to go to a cafe and talk to their partner and play a card game. And that's Sarah over there who does that, which is pretty rad. And I think that's really important when you think about all the people who play the game or try the game. These people could be potential ambassadors. We've found that over the last year, people have ended up loving the game and it being their favorite game, and they take it to every dinner party, they take it to every date night, and that is a wonderful, wonderful feeling. And knowing that that's possible is just really great to have in mind, knowing that anyone who plays your game could be someone who falls in love with it and uses it all the time. Do it your way. I think that was a point where I give 10% of the profits to other projects who are doing cool things around connecting people. And there's something about that alone that makes me love this project so much, because I get to give, whether it's even just a few $100s to other friends creating projects, and that is so satisfying. And so, yeah, there's always cool things to do beyond just the actual game and spreading the word. You can support other people's projects too. But yeah, that's it. The game's been out for about a year now, and there's, I think one of my favorite facts about it is that there's 1,900 packs out in the world that have sold. And when I think about that, it's like, if all those people just played the game once a year, there's about 5 people playing it a day, which is pretty rad. There might be people playing it right now, which is really cool. And so creating a game like this is super special, and you never know how far it might go in supporting other people with their projects, but also connecting and supporting people to learn stories about the people that they love, like I did with my mom. So yeah, thanks for listening, and I'm not sure we'll have any time for questions, unfortunately. I did create a little discount code if you are interested, but otherwise I'd love to hear any questions, maybe via email or Instagram, and I'll of course be around the next 2 days as well. But yeah, thanks for coming.